Hey everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week, my first question comes to me from Ray John H. Smith, who asks, Christians and other religions always point at people within their religion that they don't like or give them a bad name and say they aren't real. Insert faith here's. I don't like this because who determines who is real and who is not? If you base it on the holy books, more often than not, the ones that others claim not to be real are following their book. How do you feel about this? Someone who replied to your question in the comment section pointed out that that is a what's called a no true Scotsman fallacy. And the reason that that is considered a fallacy is just as you said, who gets to decide, for let's just take Christians as an example, who gets to decide who is a real Christian and who isn't? And you hear this sort of thing all the time when a critic of the faith will say, well, what about when this Christian did that? And the response is often, well, no real Christian would ever do that, or because often Christians will, or at least Christians with an axe to grind against other religions or against atheism or something like that, they'll try to tie atheism to Stalinism, or they'll point out all of the horrible acts committed by fundamentalist Muslims, suicide bombings and etc. And then when it comes time to owning up to horrible things that Christians have done in the name of their faith, it's always, oh yeah, but they weren't really Christians. They didn't get it. They didn't really understand. If they had truly understood what it means to be a Christian and what Christ really wants us to do, then they would never have done that. So they don't count. They don't count against us. And it makes really an unfalsifiable position. It means that nothing can possibly stick to you. If you're taking that position, it means that, well, you can always just say, yeah, but those guys weren't really one of us. So you're completely clean. You get to remain completely blameless and also reserve the right to place blame on other people who are members of other groups who have members who do horrible things. So it's really bad for that reason, and not to be taken seriously for that reason. As for me personally, I am big on self-identification. If a person says to me that they are a Christian, that is good enough for me. And if a person said, yeah, I'm a Christian, but then it came out that, they didn't believe in the teachings of Christ, or they didn't believe in the salvation of Christ, or they didn't believe in the Bible. I mean, if you say you're a Christian, but then it turns out your beliefs have nothing in common with the things that Christians are commonly said to have to believe in order to be considered Christians, that's a different sort of thing. But for the most part, if someone says they're a Christian, to me, that's good enough for me. Pokemaster4555. Hey Steve, I have a problem debating against one of my family members. When I present some facts on the topic, religion, that poke holes and expose the bullshit that a story in the Bible says, she will pull out her instant win card. He did it with magic. God's will made it happen. It's pretty frustrating, and I just don't know how to explain to her that a rebuttal like that sounds lame and still leaves my questions unanswered. How can I get it through her head that serious questions need serious answers? I don't know if you'll ever be able to get it through her head in the sense that she will be able to really see where you're coming from or come around to your point of view, but a good way to illustrate the difference between what she is giving you and what you're actually asking for is to cite examples that demonstrate the difference between a religious explanation for something and a scientific explanation for something. If you go by the religious explanation, which is usually it was a miracle, or God did it, or it was God's grace, or whatever, that doesn't really explain anything. And the reason why it doesn't explain anything is because it doesn't tell you what's actually happening at any level of detail other than the most generic level of, well, something happened. A true scientific explanation will take you all the way down to the furthest, the smallest level that we can perceive, and will tell you exactly what's going on. You can look at something like the way a weather system works, or the way a particular substance acts within the body. If you are exposed to a particular toxin, if you ingest a certain type of poison, it's one thing to say, well, don't take that much strychnine because you'll die. That's sort of like the equivalent of the religious explanation. You're just being told that something will happen. But there is a detailed physiological explanation of what is going on, of particular cell functions that are being impeded by the elements of this poison in some way. And if you want that explanation, that really technical, detailed, scientific explanation, you can find it. You can look up that information, and if you have the training and the understanding necessary to comprehend it, you can comprehend it and you can check and make sure that that's the right explanation. And if you're like me and you don't have that level of technical expertise, you can at least appeal to other people who do have it. You can check with different people. You can say, look, I looked up the technical explanation of how strychnine kills you, and is this right? You know, you can check it, you can show it, you can find it in very fine technical detail. Science will tell you, with a question that has a scientific answer, you can get that answer in as much detail as possible, far more detail than a layman like me could ever truly comprehend. But it's there. The question has been fully answered down to the lowest possible level. And that's the difference between a scientific explanation and a religious explanation. God did it does not answer the question, because what did God do? What processes did God employ to make this happen? How do we know that God had a role in this process? What was God's role in this process? Specifically, what happened? What transactions took place? What interactions were there between God and whatever? That answer doesn't exist because it's not a useful explanation. It's a bogus explanation. And the fact, that's, to me, that's one of the suggestive things of the fact that there is no God. That there's no such thing as an explanation of God did it that goes into any more detail than that. You never know what God actually did at a very specific, detailed level, because there's nothing to examine. God didn't actually do anything. Deuce is wild. There are some good moral teachings in the Bible. What the fuck? Are you one of those coffee club atheists who doesn't want to get blood on his hands? A fucking wussy boy? An atheist should see good in religion? You make atheism look like a limp dick, like you are, you asshole. Ooh. Here's the thing. If I am truly a critic of religion, which I am, and if I am truly of the opinion that religion overall is a bad thing and something that it would benefit us greatly to move away from and to discard, it is not in my interest or in the interest of that cause for me to mischaracterize or demonize religion. And to me, it is simply not true that religion is 100% through and through nothing but evil. I will readily say, and have said often, and will say again many times, that religion is a very bad thing. It's based on false premises. It encourages immoral behavior. It teaches people to believe in things that aren't true, to be satisfied with bad answers to their questions, to value tradition for its own sake. It impedes societal evolution. It impedes moral evolution. It encourages abuse. It encourages intolerance toward gays, toward women, toward members of all sorts of out groups. It's a horrible, horrible institution, and the further we get away from it and the more we relinquish it, the better off we are as a species. That's how I feel. But that doesn't mean that every single teaching in a religious scripture is evil or is wrong or is useless. It doesn't mean that every single religious figure is an irredeemable villain. That's a cartoon. You're talking about a cartoon. And I am not interested in engaging in a cartoon of religion. I'm interested in engaging with the real thing. And I know too much about the real thing to hold the infantile, cartoonish, caricatured opinion that you are expressing. And you can call me a wussy atheist, you can call me a coffee club atheist, all you want. It means absolutely nothing to me coming from a childish spouter of caricatures and cartoons and demonizations like you. Religion is overall a force for bad in the world. But there are good moral teachings in the Bible. Now, I believe that the Bible, interpreted literally, is is a horrible moral guide. I think it's as bad morally as it is historically and scientifically. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a single good moral teaching in the Bible. Now, I would say most, if not all, of the good moral teachings in the Bible do not originate in the Bible. They are borrowed from other sources. I would certainly never make the claim that anyone needs the Bible and its few particular good moral teachings to be a moral person. I would never say that. But if you can tell me that the Golden Rule, which is in the Bible, it didn't originate in the Bible, but it's in there, is not a good moral teaching, I don't know what the fuck to tell you. If you can tell me that the principle of forgiveness or loving your neighbor or helping the poor, or that people ought to be judged by how they treat the least of the members of their community, how they react to those who can do them no good, the amount of good that they do for the people who are the most destitute, who are the most desperate, all of which is in the Bible. And none of which, by the way, I think speaks for the overall character of the Bible or the overall morality of the Bible, none of which originates with the Bible, but nonetheless, that was not the claim. It's there. It's in the Bible. You can derive that from the text. And for me to pretend otherwise is not only dishonest and immoral, but is against my interest and is against what I'm interested in doing. And one of the other things I like to do is to talk to religious people and to have interesting conversations with them. And one of the things I hate about certain types of religious people is the way they mischaracterize and demonize atheism as I see it. And why would I want to do the same thing to their beliefs that I ask them not to do to mine? Your question is incredibly stupid and insulting. Dr. Themo, if you haven't already talked about it by You Had to Ask 12/27/2013, what do you make of this whole situation with A&E suspending Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty for his anti-gay opinions? Oh, everybody's talking about Duck Dynasty this week. Sepia Siren and Miguel Randall also asked about my thoughts on the Duck Dynasty thing. I have never watched a single episode of Duck Dynasty, and it's not because I'm above watching trashy, horrible reality TV. I've watched my share of it. I've been known to watch an episode of Hoarders every now and then, which is one of the most embarrassing shows to watch in the world. It's a horrible show, but yet I watch it because I don't know. But I've never watched Duck Dynasty. I feel like Phil Robertson has every right to believe what he believes and to say what he said in that interview with GQ. But I feel like A&E also has every right to shit can his ass for the stupid shit that he said. And I do think it's a little strange how his supporters are really digging in their heels and talking about this as a freedom of speech issue, when freedom of speech to me has no bearing on the issue at all. He hasn't been deprived his freedom of speech. I saw someone wrote an article about this, comparing the Duck Dynasty situation to what happened to the members of Pussy Riot in Russia. That is a free speech issue. Members of Pussy Riot went to jail. Their government punished them for speaking out in a way that their government did not like. That's not what happened to the Duck Dynasty guys. Freedom of speech is an issue between the government and the people. Freedom of speech doesn't mean you get to say whatever you want and you don't get to face any consequences. Freedom of speech means that the government will not limit your right to speak. And the government has not limited Phil Robertson's right to speak. He is still free to say whatever he wants, and G-men will not be knocking on his door. He can talk all the ignorant, backwards shit about gay people, and he can say all the historically illiterate, stupid, embarrassingly wrong bullshit about how, well, it must not have been that bad during Jim Crow because the black folks that he knew growing up in bumfuck nowhere, they seemed happy. So I think they might have made too big a deal out. I mean, he can say all this stupid, ignorant, bigoted, redneck bullshit he wants. And he's not going to go to jail. He's not going to be arrested. He's not going to suffer at the hands of the government one bit because of it. That is freedom of speech. He is actually a living example of the power of freedom of speech. No matter how offensive anything he says is, he will not be made to suffer by our government. That is freedom of speech. But A&E has freedom of speech too, and if A&E decides that he has become a liability because their advertisers are complaining that he is saying horrible things that are going to alienate a lot of the people that they hope will buy their products, or a lot of the audience of this show that they are sponsoring and attaching their company name to, A&E is perfectly within its rights to take whatever action they're able to take. Timothy81, hi Steve, and happy holidays. I have a comment and a question. First, I'd like to thank your listener for his question about dick pics on Reddit. It might not apply to you, but it did to me. Judging solely by the size and shape of your nose, I've seen lots of pics that must strongly resemble yours, but I could not testify in a court of law that any of them was yours. My question is this. As an atheist who only wavers between atheism and agnosticism, I am not afraid of burning in hell forever. But most of my immediate family have been cremated, and I am a bit frightened of a crematorium. Yet I don't want worms eating my body either. Can you help put my mind at ease? Perhaps this won't put your mind at ease, but maybe it'll give you some perspective. I used to actually have a problem with being cremated as well, and I know a few people we've talked about it, and they've said, I just don't like the idea of being cremated. I just don't like the idea of my body just being obliterated and having nothing left but ash to be scattered to the wind or thrown on the ground or whatever. There seems to be like a psychological roadblock with a lot of people about the idea of being cremated, and I used to have it too. And then I realized that by not being cremated and by having my body buried in the ground instead, all I was really doing was delaying the inevitable by a few billion years. Because our understanding of solar physics tells us that eventually, at some point in the far, far future, maybe another 4 or 5 billion years, the sun is going to swell into a red giant. It will probably grow to a large enough size that it will reach beyond the orbit of the Earth. It will engulf this planet, and everything on this planet will be burned to a crisp. So we'll all be cremated eventually. It's just a matter of how long. So if you want to be cremated a few days after you die, or you want to be cremated a few billion years after you die, that's really the choice. Either way, you're getting cremated. There's no way around it. And either way, you're actually not going to be around as a physical, conscious being anyway. So it really makes no difference. Afterthought BTW, Steve, is it just me, or are you putting less effort into your segues into the lightning round than you used to? I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
The lightning round. Rapid fire questions. Glib and adequate answers.
See what I did there? Curtis Morrison, do you believe extraterrestrials have visited Earth at any point? And if you had to argue that they have, what do you think would be the best evidence? I don't, and if I had to argue that they have, I would be fucked because I don't think there's any evidence. Universe. Hey Steve, what's your all-time favorite science fiction movie? For me, it's Surprise! 2001: A Space Odyssey. That movie also contains the creepiest music and the creepiest object ever in a movie, the monolith. I agree, my favorite sci-fi movie is 2001: A Space Odyssey. Piker Eyes. I read an article recently talking about how WWE should try and sign AJ Styles before the Royal Rumble so that they can push him to the top. I am not that knowledgeable about Styles, never really take the time to watch TNA too much. Seems like the mentally challenged successor to WCW most of the time I do watch it. Do you have any thoughts on what WWE should do with AJ Styles no longer being a part of TNA? Well, I don't know who wrote that article, but I think they're a little delusional. I really don't see why WWE would want to sign AJ at all. Finite Atticus. Hey Steve, do you think there is such a thing as a completely selfless act of goodwill or charity? I don't suppose there is. I mean, even in what we would normally call a selfless act in everyday conversation, I guess there is always that little bit of selfishness in there, wrapped up in all that selflessness. Your own ego, your own desire to do something good because it'll make you feel good. But I don't think that diminishes the value of the act at all. Adderall Apocalypse. Hey Steve, have you ever noticed that in songs from circa the 70s when they say love, what they usually mean is fuck, verb, transitive? And even to this day, if a song says fuck when they play it on the radio, it'll usually say love instead. But in Christian songs, when they say love, they usually mean God, proper noun. Any thoughts on that? That Christian music is kind of fucked? That if you analyze Christian music psychologically, you'll come up with some troubling shit? I don't know. It doesn't really surprise me. Also, there's that famous line from Gone with the Wind where Rhett Butler tells Scarlett O'Hara, you need to be kissed, and often, and by someone who knows how. That kiss is commonly interpreted as actually meaning fuck. Scarlett, you need to be fucked by someone who knows how to fuck, and you need to be fucked often. Makes it an interesting line, doesn't it? Philip Rottingham, I watched your 5 Stupid Things About Santa Claus this week, and I was wondering, if you ever had a child of your own, would you raise them to believe in Santa? No, I would not. I would raise them to value the tradition of Santa just the same way that I do. I think Santa, interpreted the right way, used properly, is a wonderful tradition, is a wonderful character associated with the holidays. It's a great way of being able to celebrate Christmas and indulge in Christmas and have a wonderful sort of imaginative, wondrous experience at Christmas as a child in a secular way without tying it to baby Jesus and all that religious horseshit that doesn't really do it for me. But I would not try to get my child to believe that Santa was actually real. I would tell them about Santa. I would tell them the stories, but I would not deceive my children into believing that there was a real person called Santa Claus. Malicious Bloke. Hey Steve, you must have come across a lot of these during your An Atheist Reads, so my question is this. Which logical fallacies do you find the most amusing / most annoying? The most common one, which is also, I would say, the most amusing and the most annoying, is just selection bias. People who write these books, especially when they start dabbling in like scientific fields, crazy selection bias. Their sources, the sources that they found that express opinions that agree with their thesis or their religious faith, I should say, those are the ones that you should listen to. When William Lane Craig says, oh, scientists are now saying blah, 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 he cherry picks certain scientists that say certain things that may not represent the mainstream of the scientific consensus at all. But to him, because they agree with him, because they allow him to have some scientific explanation for whatever bullshit he's trying to justify, the resurrection or the cosmological argument or whatever, he favors those arguments. And every religious apologist I've ever read has done that. Selection bias is crazy. Without it, you wouldn't be able to write an apologetics book. Cinema Nerd 14. Hey Steve, are you a fan of Joseph Gordon-Levitt? Yes, I am. Ever since Third Rock. Although I'm glad that he cut his hair, because he looked like shit with long hair. Kiss Fan 7. Hey Steve, okay, you got me. I finally want to check out wrestling again. I loved it as a teenager, but lost track of it since. Can you recommend a DVD or something to see if I can get back into it? Preferably not from ECW or 90s, early 2000s era WCW, WWF, WWE. Don't want the nostalgia goggles to gloss my view. Can't guarantee that I'll like it again, but it's worth a shot. I would recommend the CM Punk DVD. Because not only does it have a really interesting documentary about Punk himself that is actually really good, not just one of the kind of filler documentaries that they put on a lot of their DVDs, but the matches that they have included on it as well are all very, very good, and they're all very recent, because Punk only signed in WWE, I think, in 2006 or 2007. So most of the matches are relatively recent and overall are excellent. So I would recommend that, the CM Punk DVD. The CM Punk, the best in the world, it's called. I would give that a shot and see if you like that. Siri A. No. Hey Steve, have you given any thought on doing a series on pro wrestling, or maybe reviewing documentaries or pay-per-views of pro wrestling? As a fellow progressive atheist wrestling fan, I would be very excited to hear your takes on the goings-on of the business on a regular basis. After the first of the year, I think my friend Doc Gregory and I, who is a veteran of the independent wrestling scene, both as a wrestler and as a referee and a ring announcer, and who's just worked in a lot of different places on the indie scene around in the Mid-Atlantic, East Coast area. He's a buddy of mine, and I think we're going to try to do a regular, probably a weekly wrestling show, and it'll probably be like just something really simple, just like a Google Hangout and the two of us talking, nothing too fancy. But yeah, there will be a I'm going to try to do a wrestling show, and if enough people watch it, I might ask you guys who have wrestling questions to just sort of move the questions over to that show, so I can kind of segregate it and have like wrestling fan apartheid, where the wrestling, if you guys have wrestling related questions for me, I can just take them and answer them on the wrestling show and not have as many wrestling questions on You Had to Ask, because I know a lot of you guys who watch me and dig my other stuff kind of tune out or skip ahead when I start talking pro wrestling. So we'll see. That's the plan at this moment, to do like a weekly wrestling show with me and Doc. So watch for that. And that is it this week for the questions. I'm about to get out of here. But before I do, I want to give a shout out, as always. And the shout out this week goes to a really fascinating and very educational, awesome all-around channel. It's the YouTube channel of Dr. Valerie Tarico, and the YouTube handle is Trusting Doubt. Valerie Tarico, some of you may have heard her about a month ago or so on the Thinking Atheist podcast, talking to Seth Andrews. And the subject then was psychoanalyzing God. And in fact, a lot of her videos on her channel are about examining the emotions or the actions of the God of the Bible from a psychological perspective. Valerie is a psychologist, and she has a professional background and a professional education and experience that she can draw from to have a really interesting perspective on Christian belief, on the psychology of believers, on the psychology of the God that they believe in as we read about him in the Bible. She's a really interesting, unique voice in the atheist community, and really, really good videos on her channel. And if you have not checked out Valerie Tarico's YouTube channel, Trusting Doubt, you should totally go check it out, because it is excellent and well worth your time. A really interesting voice in our atheist community that deserves a very, very, very broad audience. So that is it for this week. I will be back again next week to do this all over again, provided, of course, that you guys ask me some questions. Because for me to do this, of course, you have to ask. I'm saying "of course" an awful lot because I'm taping this late at night. You can tell I'm just kind of packing it in. So leave a comment on this video. Ask me your question for next time. Anything about anything. No subject is too serious. No subject is too silly and frivolous. Ask me anything about anything. I will answer as many of them as I possibly can. And until then, see, I just blanked. Sounds like I had some kind of a seizure. I don't know. I should do these during the day, not late at night. I will see you next time.